All right, Tristan Warner, editor of Win Magazine here, joined by a very special guest, Joe Russo, who is with Beat the Streets Detroit. Joe, you have a really interesting background story before you even got into coaching, and now you're really helping kids turn their lives around. So, Joe, thanks for being on with us. And before we get started, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, your story, as much as you're comfortable with sharing, and how that kind of upbringing led you to the sport of wrestling.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on. My background with wrestling, started in high school. I was a sophomore. I got in some trouble as a kid up in Detroit and the Detroit area, Metro Detroit, and I got arrested. Found my way out to a group home called Boys Town out in Nebraska, and I wanted to play football, but everyone on the football team wrestled apparently, so I had to go on the wrestling mat first, and I'm grateful that I did because I really found that as just really the thing that kind of helped kind of get me to realize that I wasn't as tough as I thought I was. And had a really great coach, and was around a lot of really great guys. Coming up, back then this was like early 2000s, and so naturally, just kind of fell into it. Kind of almost like say by accident of really just wanting to be on the football team. And I got to wrestle for a couple years there. My senior year, I made it to the state tournament. Kind of started figuring things out. We wrestled at the University of Nebraska Omaha summer camp and duels every year, so I got a chance to be around Coach Denny and that UNO program, and a lot of my buddies ended up going to school out there, and so real great wrestling culture, wrestling tradition, as a good foundation for me to start off, and then I ended up going to college to play football, and my coach had recommended that I stay involved with a wrestling program, got me hooked up volunteering coaching my freshman year. So I was 19, started volunteering, and that same year the head coach quit and referred me to be the new head coach. So I got hired as the head varsity coach at a high school at like 19 years old, and I think it was like 10 months or something like that. So just under 20, really with again little wrestling background, and here I am, now in charge of this program. And so a couple buddies of mine that I played college football with, we all just coached the team for about 3 years, and then kind of went our separate ways, and I kept coaching, moved to Maine, and found a program up in Maine. Was coaching under Hall of Fame coach Rick DeRozier up at Massabesic High School up there. Coached with him for about 7 years. And then I found my way back to Boys Town to work as a family teacher with my wife. We were running an all-girls home, and then I was coaching there again for a couple years. And then, fast forward to COVID, really didn't have anywhere to go. So at the time, I'd lost the job. Was kind of struggling to figure out what we were going to do. Came back to Michigan, and kind of kept it going. And within 2 years of coaching back up here in Michigan, I found my way to Beat the Streets Detroit. I didn't even know there was a Beat the Streets in Detroit until one of my coaching buddies sent me a picture, and they were down in one of the rooms, and I saw the logo, and I just instantly knew I had to get involved. Started off as a volunteer, and then within a couple months, I had a full-time position with the organization.
That's awesome. What a great story. Really comes full circle when you mention getting involved with Beat the Streets. Did you feel like, kind of your upbringing, your childhood, and then also just having been a wrestling coach, did you feel like when you found out that opportunity was available, was that, to me that seems like it's almost like it was meant to be, like that's almost like your calling. You have that background where you can relate to some of these kids. You can also lead them as not only a mentor, who's made it in life, but also in wrestling.
Yeah, for sure. It was, it was kind of it was a surreal moment because again, not having the credentials or the wrestling experience that a lot of guys have. I kind of had that. I don't want to call it imposter syndrome, but it was kind of a little bit of that. Even though I'd been coaching a long time and had been successful, had a lot of really tough kids come out of our programs. Coached tons of state champs and some All-Americans, and again that's. A lot of times I tell people like that's not coaching is a little piece of it, right? And we're a good role models, and we help support them. But at the end of the day, it's the kids, it's our athletes who are out there putting out the work. It was kind of, for me, again, it was a surreal moment, but it came pretty quickly once I got on the mats with Beat the Streets, and I was around the kids and around the coaches that were on the ground in the area. And it was just a really great feeling to be able to give back and relate so much, like you said, because again, my parents weren't around. I was making all the wrong choices as a kid, and it was really wrestling that helped kind of get me grounded. Wrestling and my faith. Those are the two things that that have really helped this whole journey so far. So it was a pretty cool moment, and then also to be able to work under Mark Chiarella, and being around the Michigan guys, and all of it. It's been a really awesome experience.
That's amazing. Talk a little bit about, if you would, just for those who aren't familiar, I think most people in the wrestling community know of Beat the Streets, probably have a vague idea of what it might be, but how do these kids end up from somewhere in a, I guess, rough neighborhood or just in a tough upbringing in the city, to being in a wrestling room with wrestling shoes on their feet? Like, how does the process work where they end up coming to wrestle for you guys, and what kind of mentorship do you provide, maybe even outside of just the wrestling room?
Yeah, so it's the way that it's been working up here for us, it's been more word of mouth, right? Because we're still, especially in the city of Detroit, where historically there hasn't been a lot of wrestling programs. So it's been really word of mouth, and some of the local clubs and the people that have been around, kind of referring kids over to us, and teachers and coaches that have already, like I said, been around, and more in the I wouldn't say suburban areas, but some of the outer cities, Roseville, Warren, things like that, getting kids over to us. And our numbers haven't been, not like Chicago's, where they've got, 4,000 kids in their program, but, we've got a couple hundred, in ours that we would consider our 360 kids. And, a lot of our mentoring, just like any other program, right? A lot of it's just our coaches investing time into our kids off the mat, driving kids home, taking kids to, different enrichment activities, and making sure that their grades are good, and just being available for them, at all times, pretty much. And I don't think that Beat the Streets is different in that aspect, because that's a lot of wrestling programs, a lot of coaches just do that naturally. But just being in the inner city, I'm also the head coach at Cass Tech High School, which is the largest high school in the city of Detroit. A school that was, the wrestling program was started by Beat the Streets here about 4 years ago. So it's our 4th year competition now. And so, a lot of word of mouth, and then, just naturally too, because Detroit's such a diverse, area, Detroit metro area. We're now serving kids in Dearborn, Roseville, Warren, all the way down to Romulus, and we're even starting to get some kids that are referred to us from the rural areas. So there's kids now driving, an hour and a half to come train in Detroit, or one of our partner schools like Roseville or Romulus, or now we're up in Romeo. So we have locations all over the place.
Yeah, it's amazing. The mission is so impactful. And would you talk a little bit about, if you would, just how do you find that taking a kid who's maybe never wrestled before, or especially a kid who's coming from a tough background, or maybe like you mentioned with yourself, parents not in the picture, involved or incarcerated, how are you able to, I imagine once they get going in the sport, maybe they could see it a little bit, but how are you able to, convince a kid who's brand new to the sport of wrestling, like, hey, this sport could change your life? Or this sport is meant for you, or, you could be really good at this sport. How do you kind of get them to buy in from the beginning?
I think it's just building their relationship from the start, right? And, not making it seem like it's, it's forced upon them, almost making it to where it's their choice, because it has to be, right? We can't do it for them. I can't convince them in any other way than just show up, right? Put in the time, and trust the process, and you'll see, right? And I never promise a kid that he's going to be a state champ or, promise he's going to go to college or anything like that, but just the things that you're going to learn very quickly, right? The accountability piece, the discipline piece, and just the way that it makes their body feel, right? And that's pretty instant, right? Like the first time they come on the mat, they work hard, they break a sweat, they blow their lungs out, they're exhausted, right? And then that feeling afterwards, is usually something that keeps them coming back. So yeah, and then it just builds from there, and just the relationship piece, being consistent with that, and just being always available, and yeah, I think that's the thing that keeps them coming back.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do you have any success stories, or even just stories that stand out to you, or maybe even just in general, that's rewarding, that, you've seen a kid come out and change their life, or turn it around in some way, or accomplish something in the sport of wrestling already at a, relatively beginner stage that stands out to you?
Oh man,
Probably a lot, I would imagine.
say I'm going into my 23rd year now of coaching high school, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Over 3 states. I've coached in Nebraska, Maine, and now Michigan. And I feel like my mission has always been that beat the streets mission, and I've always found kids that have had that need. I had a kid that I coached out in Maine. I got him first when he was, I want to say fifth or sixth grade, and I coached his brother too. And his sophomore year, he won a state title for us up in Maine, and then he got in trouble, and I was going back out to Nebraska to go to Boys Town, and his mom calls me up and says, "Hey, he's in trouble. He's getting kicked out of school." We get him out to Boys Town, and within maybe 3 weeks of the call, and halfway through the wrestling season, and he ends up making the state finals twice. Junior and senior year out in Nebraska, goes and wrestles for Wartburg. Now runs a construction company up in Maine. Doing really well. And that was, again, that he graduated in, I think, 2018. But more immediately, here in Detroit, we've got tons of kids every year. I'm thinking of a kid, Isaiah, who started with us, and he's right around 200 pounds, really overweight. Not a very good wrestler. To start, and then he just kept coming, gets down to like 138 his senior year, makes the varsity squad, doesn't have a winning record, I don't think, but, he kept coming, he kept showing up, and, he ended up, doing pretty well towards the end of the year, beating kids that he wasn't beating the year before, and just his attitude and his affect, and just gets him to the point where he wants to go to trade school, and now he's a certified welder, and he's back in the area, and he wants to come coach with us and be a part of the program. Those are the ones that really stick out. And we can have the state champs and the national champs and all that. Those are great, but a kid like Isaiah really, really sticks out.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's kind of like the goal for wrestling, even though it's nice to win the titles, like you said, or to place at states or whatever it might be. It's those kids that were maybe on the wrong side of the tracks that are now doing well in life, that I'm sure is the most rewarding. When you're actively day to day in the mission with these kids, what do you feel like are some of the most important lessons of life that you're trying to instill in them, that's to ultimately help them get to where you want them to go, not just for wrestling, between the hard work and the commitment and the making the right decisions, that kind of stuff? Like, what do you try to instill in these kids the most, if you could pick a few traits that you really want to make sure they take away from not only the sport of wrestling, but being under your guidance?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question. And something that we talked about actually today at practice. Our biggest thing is, just again, holding yourself accountable, right, in everything that you do. And being able to look yourself in the mirror and know that, you've done everything that you can to get yourself to where you want to be. We all fall short, right? We all screw up, we all stumble, but it's about, recovering and getting back on track and holding yourself accountable, and being consistent, right? I think that's another thing too that we've been talking about a lot. Whether it's making sure that you're at practice or making sure that you're communicating appropriately with your parents and building those building relationships. That's another one too. Being there when you say you're going to be there.
Yep.
Things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, all really good stuff. Thanks for sharing that. How can people support Beat the Streets? From I'm sure there's tons of people in the Michigan wrestling community, but even nationwide. I know, like when you go to Final X, for example, they got the Beat the Streets New York up there. They got, they have the kids wrestling in front of that crowd, which is an awesome opportunity for them. But they also have initiatives to have the wrestling community get involved. Is there anything that anybody watching this video or reading this article that's maybe even like I said in the beginning of the interview, that's kind of heard of Beat the Streets but doesn't know much about it? How can people get involved or support the company and the mission?
Yeah, I mean, they can always visit our website at btsdetroit.org. We have a donation page there where people can come and donate. Our information's on there, my info's on there if they want to, become a sponsor or, if they want to, give a larger gift. But we have a few things coming up, this year. We actually settled a date. We're going to take our girls down to Ohio, and we're going to do a Michigan-Ohio exchange with our girls team, especially coming off such a historic, run that Michigan had, 1 point away from Pennsylvania, and we had, seven of those girls. I almost said 6 or 7 of those girls, but because we had one of them was with us, and then she ended up, still kind of. I said she's an alumni, but she ended up not being as involved this last year. But we had, we had a pretty good impact, on that team. Steve Manuel is one of our coaches as well, and of course he's done a tremendous job, up here. So we're going to take the girls down to Maryville and do something with them, and then we're working on getting our gala off the ground as well, and we're going to do a tournament up here for that. But really, we have our Detroit City Championships as well that we host every year. Those are our big things throughout the year. Then, of course, our regular programming through the spring and the summer. But we welcome all anyone that wants to help support us, especially now with Detroit Public Schools adding wrestling for the first time. Really, in the last 10 years they've added wrestling. Then really in the last 4 years, we've been able to add 4 more high schools. So, the support is needed and greatly appreciated for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that information. Wanted to bring up too with that, because I know this made me feel compelled even when I heard this, but so I was interviewing, one of the Beat the Streets Chicago coaches, Coach Sammy, if you know her.
Yep.
And she, I remember her saying, we were talking all this wrestling stuff, and I was asking her similar questions to what I asked you, and she told me probably the most powerful or rewarding, I don't know what word you would say, but the most impactful moment, she said, in all of her time there spent with all those kids was just seeing them, seeing the reactions on their faces, going places and traveling places for wrestling, but places that they would never have probably ever gone in their life. She talked about, I forget what trip they took, but seeing all these kids get on a plane for the first time, or going to another country for the first time, or whether it's Fargo, going somewhere like that. She's like, these kids would have never ended up there if it wasn't for wrestling. So, with that mission we just talked about and how people supporting can really help those things happen. What's it been like for you to see some of these kids that you have that, are if they wouldn't have gotten involved with wrestling, they wouldn't be out in Fargo, North Dakota, or, traveling to Ohio for an event like this, or going overseas for a Pan Am championship, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, very, very similar, and so it's funny you bring up Sammy too, because the last 3 summers, with our Beat the Streets National Camp and Duels, we're with Chicago,
Yeah.
I've gone down to Chicago, down to their Midway location and shadowed them and hung out with them for a couple days, and they're a great crew, and they've been huge support for us and helping us grow and kind of take it to that next level too. But every summer, these last 3 summers from Boston, 3 years ago, were the same thing. We took out a bunch of kids and never left the city of Detroit, never been on an airplane, we land in Boston. We got the limousines, the SUVs out there waiting for us, and the kids are jumping in, hanging out the windows, with food. Like, this is for us, something that you would see out of a movie,
Yeah.
and then going and staying on Boston University campus, and hanging out with all the people that come out, that hang out with us from ASICS and from all over the wrestling world, Olympians and national champions, and some of these kids don't even know who these guys are. Right?
Yeah.
And they just, and they're just hanging. And then we tell them who they are, and then they run back over. Oh, I want to get an autograph. And, same thing last year when we went to Philadelphia. We went to Philly. We went to Washington, D.C. We met up with Chicago in D.C. at the Capitol and did a tour. A lot of our kids had never been to the nation's capital. Same thing. And even this year going to Cleveland, even though it was only 2.5 hour drive, most of our kids had never been to Cleveland. They've never been, a lot of our kids have never stepped foot on a college campus.
Never been outside the city, probably even. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so it's really that's probably one of the coolest things. Every year our national camp and duels with Beat the Streets is every year it just gets better and better. We're really looking forward to next year going out to Los Angeles. That's going to be a trip. We've so yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
That's really cool. That's awesome. From a wrestling standpoint, for some of these, really all of them, how important is it for you to keep them involved in the spring and summer with this freestyle and Greco in the off season? With this being a USA Wrestling Coach's Corner feature, we always like to talk about, there's not that there's anything wrong with kids playing other sports, but obviously a lot of the best kids that we see in this sport who go on to do really big things in college and post-college are the kids that you're seeing at Fargo and at the national duels and that kind of thing. So how important is it for you guys to stress to the kids, not only to stick around in the spring and summer, but to go compete at these national level events and seek out this best competition?
It's huge for us right now. We're really pushing it, especially, in Detroit, where we haven't seen a lot of kids even wrestling folk style, and then we throw in freestyle Greco, and we're getting parents pushed back and like, I don't know if I want my kid doing that. I don't want him to get slammed or this and that. There's a little bit of a fear there, and I think it's our job to just really echo that. One, it's just as safe as folk style, or just as dangerous, however we want to put it, right? Or football or soccer, anything else, right? It's not, if you train the right way, you're going to be fine, right? Of course, anything, accidents can happen, but that's been one of the things that has kept some kids off. But I think we have a really good team right now of being able to keep kids on the mat, especially on the girls' side. I don't know what it is right now with girls wrestling just exploding the way it has, but we're not really having a problem keeping the girls on the mat. But the boys, they're getting better this year, especially in Detroit. We had a couple kids that qualified for Fargo from Detroit Public Schools that had never qualified before, just because by nature there hasn't been programs. So we had 2 kids this year from that wrestled at my high school at Cass. One qualified for Greco, one qualified for freestyle, with having very little background in it. Our Greco guy, he only been wrestling Greco for maybe 3 months, and he got there and he did really well. He went 0-2, but he had an opportunity to win both of his matches, and he kind of, just being there, right? Just being there, it just opened up his eyes, and the nerves were there a little bit, of course, but once the whistle blew, he was fine, and then after it was all over, he was really grateful that he came out, and then he also had 2 college coaches, get his information off after going 0-2. He couldn't believe it. And I'm like, see, that's why you had to come. Even if you go 0-2 and you're there's still something there, and then he can now come back and he can share that experience with the other kids, which I think is so important for them to come back and just give their own testimony to the other kids. And then now, of course, I've got kids, how can I qualify? How can I go? I want to go. It's like, all right, well, now it we state tournaments on March 7th for high school. March 9th, we're back on the mat. Like, we don't take any time off. You can do your other sports. I tell them, you can do your other sports in the spring. You can run track and all that, but you got to be on the mat a couple days a week. You got to do it. And so we're starting to see that buy-in. And I think, again, that takes time too, because especially with, with especially in the inner city, with our group in particular, again, when it hasn't been there, now that they see the coaches that are there, the coaches are invested, the mat time is there, open mats and camps and clinics, just creating those opportunities for them to get on the mat, and we're starting to see it grow.
That's so awesome. Yeah, like you mentioned, that could be a life-changing opportunity for him. Even if he goes 0-2, college coach has his contact information, and boom, he could be wrestling in college, and maybe wouldn't have been if he didn't go there. So that really is so important. One or two more questions for you I wanted to ask. Just from a general coaching standpoint, really, this could be for anybody, not necessarily with Beat the Streets, but how important do you feel the relationship that you form with the kids is? I mean, it feels like that's a piece. I mean, maybe it's always been around, but I just hear that stressed so much more these days from coaches. Reaching the kids on a level beyond just wrestling to get the most out of them and to get their best effort. How important do you feel it is to just form that bond and that relationship with the kids, and then they obviously have that respect for you, but also it definitely feels like they want to work harder and they want to perform better when they really have that good relationship with their coaches and their mentors.
Yeah, I think it's everything. It really is, and I've seen both sides of that where there's the great relationship and then there's not so good of a relationship.
Yeah.
So definitely meeting the kids where they're at, because every kid is different. Everyone has their own needs and everyone has their own experience, and so I think building those genuine relationships, not these cookie cutter relationships where you have, I don't want to. I'm not going to dog another sport or another, but there's some sports out there where, it's kind of like, that coach's relationship is kind of the same for everybody. But, so just in each individual kid building that separate relationship with them, I think is huge. You see the buy-in, is more. You see the effort is more, so really to answer your question, it's everything. Right, that relationship, and we've seen it here firsthand with what we're doing, especially on the, you could see it in our girls, right? At Fargo this year, you could really see it where our girls coaches, and our girls, the relationships, they were tight and the bonds were strong, and not just because there was a few dads that were there. There's maybe out of all of our coaches, there's probably a dozen dads that are there, coaching their daughters, and I know it's that way on the boys' side too. But I just also think girls are a lot easier to build relationships with, and our boys are always, they're a little bit harder to crack. But it's everything. Those relationships are, that's where it starts. That relationship piece.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that insight. I figured, with your background also, just in the industry you've worked in too. I personally worked for 8 years in an alternative ed school, and kind of similar to what you mentioned. And I know that was the number one thing they always stressed about, building the relationship, getting down on the kids' level, that kind of thing. Obviously, the trust and everything is stronger, and I think they're more willing to, whether it's wrestling or off the mat, they're more willing to work with you, work for you, perform for you, and all that kind of stuff, and want more out of themselves too when they have that good relationship with their mentor. So.
Yeah, and like you said it right there, it's a trust piece, right? If they know that they can trust you, and and also too that you trust them, right? Like there's got to be a trust on, it's got to be a mutual trust too. It's like I trust you that you're going to show up, you're going to give you say you're here, you're giving everything you got. I can see that, I believe you, and and I believe that you can go out there and you can perform, at your best, and also knowing too that even when they lose. Right, that we're going to be there for them. That our relationship doesn't change. That's something more recently that I've been experiencing with some of our, especially our newer kids. And like you say that that you want us to be successful off the mat, and you're not too overly focused with our performance on the mat. And they see that happen in real time when they lose. Or they lose a big match, or they're struggling, and we're not yelling and screaming and at them and making them feel a certain type of way. And it's we're supportive and taking every loss as a learning opportunity. And they see that happen in real time. That's when we're starting to see a lot of the growth, especially from our new kids.
Yeah, exactly. That the relationship isn't built off winning and losing. It's far deeper than that. 100%. Yeah. Um, Last question I wanted to ask you, Joe, is another. I don't want to call it a buzzword, but it's just a word that I hear a lot of coaches talk about, especially this day and age, is culture. You've had experience coaching at multiple different schools in different states, and now with your role at Beat the Streets as well. How important is it as a coach to just establish a positive culture? I know it can be hard when you have kids from all over the place, different backgrounds. You've got some kids that are maybe elite wrestlers and some who are brand new to the sport. I think I found it personally challenging sometimes. Even I coach in like a club capacity, and I've got 8-year-old kids who started wrestling yesterday, and I've got a 17-year-old who's going D1 on a scholarship, and I'm trying to balance all of them in the same room, trying to find something that I guess will be a positive experience for both of them, but it's kind of hard to manage that. And then you got behaviors to deal with, all that kind of stuff intertwined. How important and how do you go about kind of establishing a positive culture for your team, and I guess holding everybody accountable, but also making it fun and making sure that everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it is. You're right. It is one of those buzzwords where everyone's talking about it. For me, it's one. I hold myself accountable. From the second I step on the mat, right? And we talk about it a lot. Where you hear it's leave your ego at the door, right?
Yep.
Like, it's not about me. It's not, this isn't my room. This isn't my program. This isn't, right. This is theirs. This is their space. I'm here for them, right? So, I think it's important for coaches, to check their egos at the door, and really have it be a safe space for everybody. Like you said, whether you're a first-time wrestler or an All-American, Fargo champ, right?
Yeah, exactly.
D1 blue chip type of kid, right? Everyone's kind of held to that same standard. Is check your ego at the door. Right, no one cares. No one cares.
Yeah, you're right.
We're all in here to get better. Right, we're all at different places, and we all have different things that we need to learn, and all of that will happen organically, individually in those areas, and then we're all going to train hard, and again, we play games. Right, we don't take ourselves too serious. And again, it's that piece where it's like we said before, it's not about the winning and losing. Right, we really and putting that into practice. Right, because you can say it, right? And you hear a lot of coaches, and I know a lot of coaches even in wrestling where they'll say it, and then in practice you don't see it, right? The egos kind of take over.
Yeah.
It's about the winning. They get a little bit, crazy in the corner. You know what I mean? And you don't see that really with, that's not what we're about. And you're not going to usually hear me. I'll holler and I'll yell when I need to, right? In the appropriate ways, but it's never at a kid. It's never in anger. It's never, really in frustration at all. And just, again, having it be loose and having it be fun and, again, really no pressure, right? Not adding any pressure. These kids have enough stuff that they have to worry about on a day-to-day basis. They don't need to be worrying about wrestling, and, so it needs to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of, even reading between the lines of what you said kind of in the beginning, and I'm not tarnishing any other coaches, but it does feel like also, there's some amount of servant leadership there. I think like I said, I kind of deduced that from what you were saying, but, when you said check your ego at the door, as a coach, it really isn't about you. It's about you being there to serve them. It's kind of what I took from what you said. And it definitely seems like, sometimes, I've seen people get involved with coaching almost as like I don't want to say like a coping mechanism for themselves, but, sour about the way their career ended. So now, it's about them. But really, I found the best coaches that I've talked to, the most, successful coaches, they all seem to have that quality and that trait in common, that it's like, this really isn't about me. This is about serving the kids. And I think when you coach from that, like, philosophy, and you really believe that, and that it just comes through in a totally different way, and you get more out of your kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that, 100%. And, and I kind of use myself as evidence of that, because in all rights and, in all, when we really think about it, again, I didn't have that wrestling background. I don't have the accolades. I didn't have I didn't have all that. I've somehow still been able to get to this level where I'm at, and, again, not to pat myself on the back or anything, but I don't make it about me, right? I am truly, I'm here for the kids. I'm here to
Yeah.
serve them, whatever they need. Whether that's me going out and knocking on doors and fundraising so we can get to the next tournament, or cold calling, or showing up to practice when I only know there's going to be one kid there, right? Or whether there's going to be 60 kids there, right?
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter. I'm there for whoever shows up. And we're going to get better, right? As brands would say, right? We're going to get better today,
Yeah.
So and even, if we get that 1% better, and I've learned and I've gotten better and I've become a better coach and a better person and a better husband, a better father, better everything by being around, our programs and being around, our kids and our other coaches and, and I'm always constantly learning and wanting to get better. And the kids see that, when they see that too, and they see us and, being able to take a step back and say, no, I don't know that move, or I don't know what he's talking about, or I don't, here, go there. I encourage our kids to go to other rooms, and to get involved with other coaches and things. We welcome, other coaches in our room, other programs, because that's the only way we all get better, right?
I love that.
Being a student of the game, as they'd say.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And another great point that you made that I'm going to point out just in case anybody missed it, but I think another common trait and quality that I've noticed a lot among a lot of the great coaches is what you just said about cold calling or knocking on doors. It's that as a coach, you're not too big to do any responsibility. It's like you could be a generalist and you can be the wrestling coach and the janitor at the same time, and clean the mats or whatever. It's like there's you're not too big or you're not too all-knowing for any role, and I just kind of took that also from what you just said.
No, it really is. Our kids see that. They see me. We roll out. Some of our programs, we don't have wrestling rooms, right? We have to move. At Cass, at the school that I coach at, we're in the cafeteria, so we're moving chairs and tables and rolling mats and washing them and running around. And I'm running around trying to find an open janitor's closet so I can fill the spray bottle. And they see it. And they see us doing that. They see us. They see us driving shoes around, and they see us, again, being servants, because that's really, at the end of the day, it's what we're here, public servant for these kids. I think especially with Beat the Streets, that's all of us, right? From every chapter across the country.
Yeah.
That's a universal thing that I, every single one of these chapters, I've been able to, get to know a lot of these guys over the last few years, and I'm super proud and grateful to be part of such an amazing organization that really is, across the country, right? LA, all the way up to New England, right? Tampa, Chicago, Cleveland, every all of us, we're all doing a really great job, and I think we need more of it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the mission is incredible. Like I said, I really wanted to have you just explain a little bit more about what the mission is and the organization and how people can support it, because it's really just fantastic. And we're not only, there's so many great human interest type stories that I'm sure come out of Beat the Streets every year of kids whose lives are turned around, but we're also seeing their success on the national stage at Fargo and, at the state tournament on a state level and stuff like that. So kudos to you and the staff at Beat the Streets Detroit. Before we hang up, Joe, anybody you want to shout out, or anybody we should watch out for in the coming year that's coming out of Beat the Streets Detroit that's like, this kid's a stud, or I want to thank this coach, or anybody you want to shout out before we sign off, feel free to take this time to do that.
Yeah, I definitely want to shout out Mark Trella, who's our, our board chair, and our board for supporting us all these years, and Michigan Wrestling, of course. We added Tay Gadali to our staff this year, and, he's been awesome. Steve Manuel, is amazing. And he's opened up his room to everybody, not even just the girls. We got, boys going into the room now up there. He's over in Baku with his daughter Kylie, going for that world title. And then all of our coaches, all of our, because they're all volunteers, right? We have some stipend guys too, but our whole coaching staff, and U of D Jesuit and Detroit Public Schools for opening their doors to us these last several years and being able to grow. Without them, we wouldn't have a room, we would be able to get on the mats if they're not opening their doors for us. So they've been great partners. And of course, got to shout out my wife and kids, because there's a lot of time that that's taken away as a coach. So their support means everything. And then on the athlete side, we've got so many kids that are going to have really bright futures because of this sport. We've got a couple, say Nolan Bishop, who was the kid I was mentioning earlier, coming out of Detroit. Cass Tech, who, again, goes 0-2 at Fargo, never wrestles Greco, but, is probably now going to wrestle in college. We've got, we've got quite a few. Jeremiah Denson as well, who we had up there. His sister Lily won it. She kind of went viral holding the picture of her mom.
Oh my gosh,
she was
yeah.
getting
I was going to
stop
say.
sign. So
there wasn't a dry eye in the mixed zone back there.
yeah, that almost didn't happen. Getting that photo to her almost didn't happen. I had to go to the FedEx store, print the picture off, run to the Target, get the frame, and then get back to the Fargo Dome. And I got there.
So
maybe
you were behind that?
Well, it wasn't just me. I played my role in it, but
okay.
It was her brother's idea. He wanted to do it, and then Steve called me up. He's like, "Hey, we got to do this. And hey, any way you can get to the, So I was like, "Oh, so yeah." I made the run to go print it off and get the frame and got it back.
So
it was a team effort for sure, but yeah, it almost didn't happen.
I just wrote my column for the magazine that's coming out next week, and I literally wrote in there in the article that was the most goosebumps moment of the entire tournament for me. That was incredible. So yeah, that's awesome that you were a part of that. But good, amazing job for her too. She looked fantastic, not only on the mat, but that was just a heart gripping moment, I guess you would say. We were trying to ask questions in an interview, and everybody's like crying back there.
Yeah, everybody was crying.
Yeah.
And she's such a great kid, and she's a beast, man. And she again, having really about a year of freestyle under her belt, right? I mean, it's amazing.
Just crazy.
I'd really watch her brother Jeremiah for next year.
Yeah.
He's gonna go. He's entering in his junior year. He went 2-2 this year.
Okay.
And real quick funny story on him. He goes 2-2, and then we get back to the Airbnb, and the lady next door, she had her lawnmower out, and she's a little older, and he went over and he mowed her lawn, and
No way.
yeah, trying to raise money to to help give to his sister so she can get like her VR goggles or Apple goggles or something like that.
Okay.
But he's just just a great kid, great group, great
That's
family.
amazing.
And we're really grateful that they're, that we get to be such a small part of their lives.
Yeah, amazing. That's so cool. Yeah, so many great stories come from Fargo that you don't hear unless you talk to somebody like you who's there on the front lines with the kids, and just so many amazing things you hear just walking around the floor. The girl from Illinois who bumped up 2 weight classes after missing weight and then won it. Like just little things that you wouldn't know if you weren't down there. But yeah, this has been fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much for coming on. I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but this interview and this article will be in Wynn's upcoming Fargo issue, which will print this Friday, actually, July 31st. So look forward to publishing the article and getting it out there to the masses and having people learn more about BTS Detroit and everything that you guys are doing up there. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch up with you again later down the road, and we'll do this again.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Take care, Joe. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Bye.